Okay, good evening, gentlemen. Be'ezat Hashem, we need special siyata d'shmaya tonight. This topic tonight is a fantastic eye-opener of the Vilna Gaon, and it's directly related to the Galut and Parashat Shemini, this week's parsha. It's amazing how every time we speak about Parashat Shemini, we always talk about the concept of kashrut. This time, we're going in a completely different direction, and we're going to be speaking about the exile, the final galut, the galut of Rome, and this galut on our times in this week's parasha. Kidarkenu b'kodesh, I'd like to start with a beracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam sha'kol niya bidvaro. Thursday night share, and here we go. The Gemara in Yuma tells us that there was a very distinct difference between Bayit Rishon and Bayit Sheni. When it came time for Bayit Rishon to be destructed, the Gemara tells us, this is found in Yuma Daf Tet Amud Bet, Mikdash Rishon b'pnei ma charav. Why was the first Bet HaMikdash destroyed? Mipnei Gimel Divarim, because of the three cardinal sins: Avodah Zarah, Gilu al Rayot, and Shvichut Damim. So we all know that the first Bet HaMikdash destroyed because they were over on the three terrible sins in Klal Yisrael. However, when it came to the second Bet HaMikdash, the Gemara tells us something completely different for the cause of its destruction. Aval Mikdash Sheni, says the Gemara, Shayu oskim ba Torah mitzvot. They were learning Torah. They were doing mitzvot. Gemilut chasadim. They were doing acts of kindness. And yet, why was the second Bet HaMikdash destroyed? Mipnei shahaita bo sinat hinam. Says the Gemara, was because of this baseless hatred that Jews couldn't get along. And there was this hatred inside of them that they just couldn't stand other people. It's amazing. So let's get clarity. Step number one, the difference between the destruction, Bet HaMikdash Rishon and Bet HaMikdash Sheni. The first Bet HaMikdash destroyed because of the three cardinal sins. The second Bet HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam. So obviously turns around the Gemara and says, what do you see from here? That Sinat Chinam is shakul, it's equal to all three cardinal sins. Because he needed three cardinal sins, Avodah Zarah, Shvichut Damim, and Gilui Arayot, to destroy the first Bet HaMikdash. So that means you need the same equal force of evil to bring down the second Bet HaMikdash. And yet the Gemara tells us that the sin that brought down the second Bet HaMikdash, Sinat Chinam. Therefore the Gemara deduces that Sinat Chinam is shakul, all three cardinal sins together. That already, we got our money's worth on this share. To understand that Sinat Chinam is keneged, the shalosh averot chamurot, is already a musar shmuz. Although tonight's not the shmuz, tonight's the share, but that already needs to drive us home, to explain to us why we're still here. We're still here because of a sin that is literally equal to the three cardinal sins themselves. But then, the Gemara goes on to say something fascinating. And I'd like to quote my very close friend, Rabbi Gladstein from Cedarhurst, who, when he pointed out this Gemara, he highlighted this line. And the Marmakomot of tonight's share comes from a beautiful shmuz that he gave, and I want to share with you some of these points. The Gemara goes on to say, listen to this. The first Bet HaMikdash, listen to this. They were over on Gilui Arayot, Shvichut Damim, Avodah Zarah. And yet, listen to what the Gemara says. Yes, they did Averot, they were Risha'im. But says the Gemara, in the first Bet HaMikdash, Ela shatalu bitchonam ba'Kadosh Baruch Hu. They still had bitachon in Hashem. In spite of the 3 terrible sins, but they still had bitachon in Hashem. Amazing. Whereas in the second Bet HaMikdash, it sounds like not so much. Now this is a little bit odd. If you just told me that they did the 3 cardinal sins, and the Gemara is referring to them as Rishaim, they were Oved Avodah Zarah. They did Gilui Arayot. They murdered people. And yet the Gemara still comes back and says, but by the way, I want you to know, they were Boteach Bashem. They had great bitachon. What is the Gemara coming to say with that? I mean, if they were such Rishaim that they did the 3 cardinal sins, then what bitachon did they have? And why is the Gemara even talking about it? And what type of bitachon do you have when you're doing the 3 worst sins of history? I mean, so Rabotai, open your hearts. There's something amazing here that I think we really need to hit on tonight. I'd like to show how the Vilna Gaon is going to bring this home to our parasha. But this is something that I think is fascinating. Because if you take a look at the next piece of Gemara, which is the piece that not too many people talk about, the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Yochanan would say, Rishonim, the people of the first Bet HaMikdash, shenitgale avonam, their sins were out in the open. And because the averot were open, nitgale kitzam, their end of the galut was also open to them as well. So basically what he's saying is, because the averot were known, so the end of the galut was made known to them as well. But bayit sheni aharonim shelo nitgale avona, that they had a sin that was inside. Sinat chinam. You don't know what the guy's thinking. On the outside, he might even play your best friend. You know that famous Vilna Gaon? The Gaon says, what's the difference between oyev and soneh? Oivecha and sonecha. They both mean enemies. Says the Gaon, they both mean enemies. There's a huge difference between oivecha and sonecha. Oivecha is an enemy who on the outside he lets you know that he's against you and that he hates you. He's an oyev, an open enemy. You know exactly where he stands. But sonecha, sin'ah, sin'ah is on the inside, says the Gaon. On the outside, this guy might even play your friend. But on the inside, he harbors such hate and he's waiting for the moment to get you when you turn your back. Says the Gaon, which one is worse? He says, of course, the soneh is much worse than the oyev. The soneh, he hates you on the inside. He doesn't show his cards. You don't know that the guy's against you. That's a more dangerous enemy than the enemy who clearly lets you know that he's up in face against you. Sinat chinam is a sin'ah inside. They harbored hatred on another guy, on another Jew, although they might not have shown it. And because of that, says Rabbi Yochanan, in the first Bet HaMikdash, all the averot that they did was opened on the outside. And because their averot were on the outside, the ketz of the end of the galut was nidgaleh to them openly as well. Their sins were open, the ketz was open. But in the second Bet HaMikdash, their averot were hidden. And therefore, the ketz, the end of their galut, was hidden to them as well. It seems like it's a galut that just doesn't end. Unbelievable. Amazing. Ad kedei kach, that Rabbi Yochanan tells us over there in the Gemara, that with the terrible averot that the people of the first Beit HaMikdash did, and still, they were so much greater than the people of the second Beit HaMikdash. Would you believe that? Second Beit HaMikdash, they were learning Torah. Second Beit HaMikdash, they were doing Gemilut Chasadim. Second Beit HaMikdash, they were doing mitzvot. And yet, they weren't as great as the people of the first Beit HaMikdash who were over on Gilui Arayot, Shvichut Damim, and Avodah Zarah. Matter of fact, if you want to hear the terminology, listen, this is amazing. Rabbi Yochanan says over there in Yuma, Daf Tet Amud Bet, that's the Gemara we're talking about. Rabbi Yochanan says, the tziporen of the Rishonim, the nails of the people of the first Bet HaMikdash, right, were better than the stomachs of the people of the second Bet HaMikdash. The tziporen is on the outside. The nails you can see on the outside. The stomach of a person you cannot see. It's hidden on the inside. So the outwardly averot that the people of Bet HaMikdash Rishon did was not as bad as the inwardly averot of harboring hate against another Jew that was found by the people of the second Bet HaMikdash. So says Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that tzipornaim were better than their stomachs. That's amazing. And if this is the case, we got to talk a little bit about this idea. What is so bad about sinat chinam that sounds like it surpasses avodah zarah, shvichut damim, gilui arayot? At least the Gemara told us it's shakul. That means it's equal to all three. Really? I know it's terrible to hate a person, to hate another Jew, but between me and you, what's the punishment of sinat chinam? Does the Torah tell us a punishment? I mean, you might be mevatel ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, lo tisneh achicha bilvavecha, maybe. All right, so maybe you'll get a lav, but it's a lav she'en bo ma'aseh. There's no ma'aseh. There's no ma'aseh. So I can't even give you lashes for it. So here I have something that the punishment, I can't even give you malkut for, because there's no ma'aseh. On the other hand, murder, we kill you. Avodah zarah, with hatra'ah, they'll kill you. Arayot, hatra'ah, they'll kill you. And yet, these sins, that the punishment is death, and somehow or other, they're not as bad as sinat chinam. Whereas sinat chinam, the Gemara says, is equal to all three. And yet the punishment of sinat chinam, not even malkut. How do you understand this? Gentlemen, this is where tonight's share is going. The concept of sinat chinam. Let's touch upon this and let's take a step back. There's a famous Gemara in Kiddushin. The Gemara tells us that yetzer hara is so bad that even his creator calls him ra. Hashem refers to the yetzer hara as evil. He calls him ra. I want to ask you a question. What's so bad? What's so bad? Listen, Hashem brought us into a world and He wanted to give us freedom of choice. He wanted us to earn our own reward so that He gives us a reward in the best possible way to reward a person. Not as a handout, but something that they mastered their own success. I had to choose. I had to overcome the challenge. I had to go away from the bad, choose with the good. Ubacharta b'chaim. You deserve that reward. The best reward, the most perfect reward that you can give a person is a reward that they deserved. But in order to have that challenge, there's going to have to be somebody that's going to have to test me to do bad. Someone's going to have to take the job of yetzer hara. There has to be a force that's pulling you towards bad, and a force that's pulling you towards good, to give you a freedom of choice, to make the right decision, to give you the reward that you're going to earn, which was the tachlit of creating man in this world. So says the Ramchal, so says the Maharal. And if that's the case, what do you want from the yetzer hara? He's a computer program. He was programmed to do evil. He was programmed to tempt you to sin. He was programmed to get you to do what you shouldn't be doing. That was part of the game plan of creating you. You need somebody to do the bad guy job. Every situation has the good guy and the bad guy. So Hashem created him. I have a job for you. Might not be a job that everybody wants, but at the end of the day, somebody got to do it. So he was the one that Hashem appointed to do it. So why is he referred to as evil? Just the opposite. He does his job pretty darn good. You know that famous Maisa, Rabbi Hutner. The great Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner. He was so sharp even when he was young. So he was in the yeshiva of Slobodka. And in Slobodka one time he was in the hallway. He was in the hallway. And the altar came out. And the altar saw Rabbi Hutner walking, pacing back and forth in the hallway. And he was talking over a sugya. So the altar asked him, Rabbi Yitzchak, what are you doing out here in the hallway? Go into the Bet Midrash. So Rabbi Hutner told him, Alts Bacher, he told him, I'm going over the sugya with my havruta. So the altar said to him, who? He says, I have a chavrusa with my yetzer hara. I'm going over the sugya with my yetzer hara. So the altar says to him, Im ken. So why don't you at least have a chavrusa shaf with your yetzer tov? So Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner in his sharfkeit answered such a sharp answer. He says 2 reasons. Number 1, my yetzer hara is a lot smarter than my yetzer tov, and I wanted a sharper chavrusa. And number 2, this chavrusa, yetzer hara, he always shows up. Great. And Rabbi Hutner was unbelievable sharp. He always shows up. He does his job. What do you want from him? He does the job he was programmed to do. And he does it with pikhut. And he takes you an inch at a time. And he schleps you along. So why does Hashem call him Ra? That's the Gemara. The Gemara in Kedushin tells us that Kashe yetzer hara, he's so bad, afilu yotzro kira'o ra. That even his yotzer, even his creator, calls him evil. What do you want from him? He's doing his job. He was designated for the job, for your toelet. He's what we call in boxing a sparring partner. But without that sparring partner, you'll never grow. So why is he called evil? He's just doing his job. Fantastic question. So Rabotai, it's amazing. Not only Borei Olam calls him evil, but the Gemara in Sukkah tells us, this is the famous Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara tells us, Atid Lavo, when Mashiach comes, you know what Hashem's going to do? He's going to take the yetzer hara. This is the first line of business. When Mashiach comes, Hashem's going to take the yetzer hara, v'shochato, he's going to slaughter him. He's going to slaughter him in front of the tzaddikim, he's going to slaughter him in front of the Rishayim. Whoa. What are you slaughtering him? Give him a medal. He did the best job that probably anybody serving the great master plan delivered for what he was told to do. And boy, did he do it. And yet, the first line of business, Latid Lavo, Hashem's going to take him and shecht him. Shecht him, give him an award. Or maybe retire him. Retire him. You send him to Chveis, let him go back home to Vegas, but to his hometown. But at the end of the day, what are you slaughtering him for? Amazing. Yeah. So I want to touch upon a point, and I'm going to reiterate a beautiful idea that I heard from Rabbi Gladstein, and I'm hoping that we could have the siyata d'shmaya to give this over on tonight's share. Let's go back to the sar of Esav himself, the archangel. The first time the sar Esav, he shows himself in Torah, is on that fateful, famous night. Yaakov Avinu goes back for the pachim ktanim, and sure enough, vayivater Yaakov levado, vayeavek ish imo ad alota shachar. And right away, all the Mefarshim, Rashi tells us, who is this Ish that Yaakov Avinu wrestled with until Alot HaShachar? That was the Sar of Esav. That was the Samach Mem. That was the Nachash. That was the Yetzer Hara. It's the same body of evil. Amazing. So here Yaakov Avinu, he fights with the Sar of Esav all night. If I would ask you a question, in your mind's eye, when you think about that episode, how do you picture the Sar of Esav to look like? What do you think? What do you think? What comes to mind when the picture of the mind plays that scene of Yaakov Avinu, beautiful long white beard, kamuvan, Kodesh Kodashim, Yaakov Avinu, and he's wrestling with the Sar of Esav. What does that Sar Esav look to you? What do you think he would look like? It's very interesting. The Gemara in Chulin tells us in Sadi Aleph Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, you know what he looks like? Says the Gemara, Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani says, the Sar V'Esav, the yetzer hara, he looks like Oved Kochavim Nidmelo. He looks like a goy. So he shows up in jeans, with a tank top, with heavy metal, with his hair, and he looks like a goy straight away. But it's very interesting. The Gemara tells us, however, Rav Shmuel Bar Acha, who came in front of the great Rav Papa in the name of Rava Bar Ula, he says, no, Ketalmid Chacham Nidmelo. The yetzer hara looks like a Talmid Chacham. He looks like a Rosh Shiva. He's wearing a frock. He looks like he comes off as a Talmid Chacham. My gosh, talking about two sides of a spectrum when it comes to a machloket. They're fighting over here in Chulin Sadi Aleph Amud Aleph. What does the yetzer hara look like? One rabbi tells us, he looks like a goy. Picture a real Bowery bum goy. And then the other rabbi tells us, no. He looks like a Talmid Chacham with a white beard and a magnificent hat and a long two-button jacket. Wait. From where to where? What does that mean, Bichlal, that the yetzer hara would actually look like a Talmid Chacham? Well, what's the deal with that in the first place? So, Rabotai, let's take a step back and go into the Parsha. And I want to show you how this is going to come together and how this is going to work into the Parasha itself. Because there's a message here for a Jew today in Galut that is unbelievably powerful by the Gaon himself. So let's bring the pieces together. Here we go. In this week's Parasha, it tells us about the animals that are kosher to eat and those who are not. Now it's very interesting. In the Parasha, it mentions 4 particular animals that are not kosher. But 3 are in one category, and the 4th is in a category by itself. The first 3 are the gamal, the shafan, the arnevet. Now, these 3 animals, the camel, the shafan, the arnevet, these 3 animals, it's interesting. They chew their cud, but they don't have split hooves. Now, we already know that there are 2 simanei kashrut. It needs to be, number 1, that the animal has split hooves. And number 2, it has to chew its cud. It regurgitates its food after it digests it the first time and redigests it sometimes again and again. It's called chewing its cud. If it doesn't have these 2 simanim, it's not kosher. Now, the gamal, the shafan, the arnevet, has the concept of chewing its cud, but it doesn't have split hooves, and therefore they're not kosher. But there's a 4th example of an animal mentioned in this week's parasha that's also not kosher, but it's exactly the opposite. Where at least these 3 animals chew their cud, but they don't have split hooves. This animal has split hooves, but does not chew its cud. And that obviously we're talking about the chazir. The pig is an animal that's not kosher. Lehefech, it's probably the symbol of the complete tarfut of the goyim, the pig. And that is one that, although he looks like he has something going because he has split hooves, but he does not chew his cud. So again, we have 4 animals not kosher because they're missing one of the 2 simanei tahara. Very interesting. Says the Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah, Parasha Yud Gimel, that these 4 non-kosher animals actually correspond to the 4 galuyot that Klal Yisrael destined to go through until Mashiach comes. The first galut is the Gamal. That's the galut of Bavel. And the Midrash tells us from Psukim the connection between the Gamal and the concept of Bavel. Like on Bavel it says, Ashrei shamlem lach egmulech shegamalta lanu. Gamalta milashon gamal. That was Bavel. That was Bavel. So Bavel represented by the Gamal, an animal that was not kosher, missing one of the simanei kashrut. So the first animal corresponds to Bavel, that's the Gamal. The second animal, well, that's the Shafan. The Shafan corresponds to Madai. And again, the Midrash brings us psukim of why. The third animal was the Arnevet. The Arnevet corresponds to Yavan. And then the fourth animal, the pig, the Chazir, well, that already is Galut Edom. That's the fourth and final Galut. 4 non-kosher animals, 4 Galuyot. Very interesting. Comes the Vilna Gaon, and he says something mind-boggling. He says, listen, Bayit Rishon, we actually touched upon 3 of those nations, of those Galuyot. Bayit Rishon started with the destruction Bavel. But then after that, we went to Madai. And then after that, when Madai was finally overthrown, it started the era of Yavan. And then later on, Bayit Sheni, it continued. But Bayit Rishon, we actually came to Bavel, Madai, Yavan. Now the Midrash just told us that these 3 nations were represented by 3 animals in this week's parasha. The Gamal, Bavel. The Shafan, Madai. The Arnevet, Yavan. Says the Gaon something genius. He says, you know the shaychut between these 3 nations, these 3 animals that represent these 3 nations, and the first Bet HaMikdash? He says it's very pashut. Because these 3 animals, what did we say they had? On the inside, they chewed their cud. So on the inside, they were kosher. But on the outside, their hooves were not split. So on the outside, they were not kosher. That's exactly what the Gemara told us about the people of Bayit Rishon. The people of Bayit Rishon who did those 3 cardinal sins, on the outside, they did averot openly, but still on the inside, they had bitachon in Hashem. So it's brilliant how the people of Bayit Rishon, the reason why they were subjugated to go through galut of these 3 nations, Bavel, Madai, Yavan, is because Bavel, Madai, Yavan is the Gamal, the Shafan, and the Arnevet. What type of animals are those? Those are animals that on the outside they show their trefut. On the outside they show there's no split hoof, but on the inside they chew their cud. On the inside they're good. Because these people on the outside were doing averot, but on the inside they had bitachon in Hashem, they were subjugated to the 3 nations that are compared to the 3 animals, that on the outside they look taref, but on the inside they have simanei kashrut. Brilliant. Ma she'en ken Bayit Sheni. Bayit Sheni, we already saw, the Gemara told us, that the people there on the outside look good. They did Torah on the outside in Bayit Sheni. They did mitzvot. They did milut chasadim. Their problem was inside, sinat chinam. Inside, they hated another Jew. They harbored hatred against their fellow Jew. If that's the case, they're going to be subjugated to the Chazir, to Edom. The Chazir on the outside looks kosher, but on the inside he doesn't chew his cud. On the inside is the problem, is the tarfut. And because the people were rotten on the inside, they were given over to a nation of Edom, who's represented by the Chazir, who also on the outside looks so kosher, but on the inside is so taref. Wow, that is something off the charts. That's the Vilna Gaon, Rabotai. You can find this Gaon in the Pnineh Mishulchan Hagra in this week's parasha, in Parashat Shemini, and he says this incredible einfall, this brilliant idea. How literally the way the people acted was exactly midah keneged midah to the nations they were thrown into galut by. Because that's what their actions brought them, to a nation that would fit the averot on the outside, as opposed to bayit sheni, the averot on the inside, exactly like the chazir. That's a wow. That's incredible. If this is the case, says the Gaon, he says, I mean, this is really, I'd like to take this to the next level. He says, in Bayit Rishon, when the yetzer came after the people, he tempted them to do the 3 cardinal sins. He tempted them to do avera openly on the outside. So the yetzer came like the arnevet, like the gamal, like the shafan. Where on the outside, they show their taref. Yetzer came and attacked them like these animals, to show on the outside the averot they're doing. Although on the inside they had bitachon, the Gemara says, like these animals, and on the inside they chewed their cud. But the game plan in Bayit Rishon was to get people to fall on the outside in the open, representing like these 3 animals. But when Bayit Sheni came around, says the Gaon, the yetzer changed his tactic. He didn't come like the gamal, the arnevet, the shafan. In Bayit Sheni, he came and he attacked the people like the chazir. He had a new tactic. And his tactic was now lehefech. I want you to look like a tzaddik on the outside. I want you to show like the chazir shows everyone, look at my split hooves. Look, I'm kosher. I'm a great person. I'm a good person. He wanted to show that on the outside he's good. But the yetzer attacked them like the chazir, where instead of on the outside, now on the outside you look like a very frum Jew. They're learning Torah, mitzvot, gemilut hasadim. But on the inside, they're rotten. They're maleh sin'ah. They're maleh sin'at chinam. Literally the chazir. Says the Gaon, take a look at the way the yetzer switched his tactics. And he says, this was the secret behind the self-delusion that the yetzer did to the people in Bayit Sheni. And this self-delusion was so bad that it was even worse than the first people in Bayit Rishon. The Bayit Rishon, they showed you this. These are our problems. This is who we are. We fell to this taiva. We fell to that yetzer. We fell to avodah zarah. But on the inside, we're still boteach b'Hashem. It is what it is. We're showing the clear picture. No shtiklach. We know that we have stuff wrong with us. We know that on the openly we've messed up with averot. But on the inside, we're still holding on. Came Bayit Sheni, the yetzer switched his tactic. And he says, on the outside, let everyone see you're great. You're the firmest Jew on the block. But on the inside, there was such sin'ah, mamash like the chazir. It was a self-delusion 100%. It actually showed one person on the outside and one person on the inside. Says the Gaon, and this is something that you find the Mesilat Yesharim talks about as well. Like we said before, when a person falls to averot, and it's open, it's clear where they're holding and what they need to do. But the guy who thinks that he's the frummest Jew out there, and on the inside, he has such a rotten demeanor where he hates this guy. And he's speaking Lashon Hara Yom V'Layla on that guy. And he's starting machloket with everybody else. On the outside, the guy looks like mamish, the frummest guy you've ever met. But on the inside, mamish the chazir. Mesilat Yesharim writes that this guy is kashem mikulam. Because he himself is buying his own lukshin. He himself is convinced that he's a tzaddik. He himself believes that he's the most religious, God-fearing Jew. He thinks when he comes up to Shamayim, he has waiting for him armanot of unbelievable reward. And meanwhile, this guy is worse than the guy of all Gimel Averot Chamurot. He's so disillusioned that he doesn't even know there is what to change. He doesn't even know that there is what to fix, to do tshuva on. This guy was worse than all. Says the Gaon, and this, this is found as well, if you take a look in the works of the Ben Ish Chai, the Ben Ish Chai in Ben Yoyada over there in Kiddushin, Daf Lamed Amud Bet, the Ben Ish Chai says, this is why Hashem calls the yetzer hara ra, evil. Why? That's not what I hired you for. I hired you to bring averot to people. I hired you to tempt them to do averot that is clear, cut, what's wrong as opposed to what's right. Freedom of choice. Now you choose. Avodah zarah, gilui arayot, shvichut damim. Choose. But I never hired you to bring people to do mitzvot. I hired you to bring people to do averot. I hired you, says the Ben Yoyada, Hashem says to Yetzer Hara, I hired you to be the gamal, the shafan, the arnevet. I hired you to be the guy that openly on the outside, he shows you, I'm treif. Show him openly the treif, the tarfut, and let them choose if they want to be nichshal or not. I hired you to be the gamal, the shafan, the arnevet. I did not hire you to be the chazir. That's what the Ben Yoyada says to, Hashem says to the yetzer hara. And because of that, you took this to a place that you were never given a reshut to go. But that's the nature of evil. That's why afilu yotzero kirao ra. He took his game and he turned it inside out like the chazir. What do you mean? Look at me. I'm a kosher yid. Look at my hooves. Look at my levush. Look at my yichus. Sometimes you hear people talk, mamish, they're their own marketing company. Look at my this, look at my that. And meanwhile on the inside, the guy is ra. It hurts to talk, God for Hashem, that way. But the yetzer hara brings the guy to that. Where instead of, he brings a mitzvah. I'll bring you a mitzvah to do. I'll bring you a mitzvah. What's the problem? I'll bring you a mitzvah to do. I want you to daven out of your phone. Because I want you to daven inside. I don't want you to daven bal peh. You have more kavanah if you daven inside. So daven from your phone. Meanwhile, every 5 minutes that this guy's davening from his phone, another drop-down message comes. Dring. Oh, Taka, I just got an email. Dring. Oh, Taka, someone just answered me on a WhatsApp. I was waiting for that guy all day to answer me. Dring. The yetzer hara is laughing. I brought you a mincha to daven. I brought you a mincha to daven. And I got you to bring such abomination to the minyan in such a way of chazav. It's a way of a chutzpah where you're sitting in front of Hashem and you're literally watching your emails come in and you can't help yourself to read the subject line or the opening 2 sentences before it disappears, and you're a mill of shma kolenu, and the guy's thinking, but I'm a tzaddik. I'm davening from my phone. The yetzer hara got you to quick, go daven mincha. He reminds you to daven mincha. He brings you to the minyan. He's mizares you to be from the Asara Rishainim. And then he gets you to daven from the phone. And now the tefillah turns into a slap in the face. Kivyachol to Borei Olam's honor. Better don't come and daven. Mamash the chazir. Says Borei Olam, you're ra. I never hired you for that. I hired you to bring averot to people. I did not hire you to masquerade the evil with the wrappings of mitzvot. That I never brought you for. That you were never hired for. And this is the reason why, says unbelievable, says the Gaon. And I want to share with you the words of Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem. Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem says, that's why we're going to shecht him. That's why he's going to be shechted when Mashiach comes. You want to know why? Listen to this. This is off the charts. You came tonight just to hear this. It was already Dayenu. Says the Gemara, Masechet Shabbat. Shochet mishum mai. When you slaughter an animal on Shabbat, what are you over on? What is the melacha of shechita b'Shabbat? What did you do wrong? Where is the transgression? So machloket in the Gemara. The Gemara Shabbat af Ayin Hei Amud Aleph, Ayin Hei Amud Bet. Says the Gemara, the first man, the Amar says, Rav Amar mishum tzoveya. When you shecht an animal, tzoveya, the blood comes pouring out of the perek. It colors everything in its contact. You are tzoveya b'Shabbat. You color it on Shabbat. That's the isser of the melacha of shechita. Comes the Andaman the Amar, comes Shmuel, right? Ravu Shmuel. Comes Shmuel and says, no, mishum netilat neshama. By shechting the animal, you took its life force out. Asur on Shabbat, it was melacha netilat neshama. You removed the life force from the animal. So the Gemara says, is there really a machloket here? Says the Gemara, mishum tzoveya in mishum netilat neshama lo. Is the Gemara on Shemuel? Only netilat neshama? Well, you don't agree to Rav that when you shech the animal, the blood goes everywhere and it's tzoveya and colors everything? Says Shmuel, no, I agree with him. Ema af mishum tzoveya. Af mishum tzoveya. Yeah. It's netilat neshama and you're over on Soveya according to Shemuel. But listen to this amazing machloket. Why aren't you allowed to slaughter and shecht an animal on Shabbat? What's the malacha? What are we transgressing? One rabbi says, Soveya, you're coloring. The other rabbi says, not only are you coloring, you're also doing netilat neshama. Unbelievable. Listen to this amazing Baal Shem. Comes Tosafot on this Gemara, and Tosafot over there in Ayin Hei in Shabbat says, what is this Gemara talking about? Who's shechting on Shabbat, says the Gemara. Says Tosafot, Lav ashochet de matnitin ka'eh. This is not going on stam a shochet, stam a regular shochet. This Gemara was asking Ela al ashochet de alma kama. The shocheta of the world. Says the Baal Shem, what does Tosafot mean, the shochet of the world? Says the Baal Shem, this Tosafot means the shochet of the alma. He's talking about the Malach HaMavet. He's talking about the yetzer hara. Shochet, shochato mishum mai. Why are we shechting this guy? La'atid lavo, when Mashiach comes. How come Hashem says that this yetzer hara is going to be the first one to be shechted? Rav Amar mishum tzoveya, because he colored everything. Nothing that he brought to us was the way it was supposed to be. He was supposed to bring averot, not mitzvot. He was supposed to be the gamal, the shafan, the arnevet. Nobody hired him to be the chazir. And because he went, and instead of doing what he was supposed to do to bring averot, instead he was tzoveya. He colored everything. It looked one way and really was something else. On the outside it looked good, but on the inside it was treif. Because of that, he gets a shechita in return. Wow, what a Baal Shem. What an unbelievable Baal Shem. And then the Baal Shem goes on to say, and this works with Shemuel as well, Nitilat Neshama. This is the yetzer, this is the Malach HaMavet, this is the Sarv Esav. This is the Sarv Esav. That his Nitilat Neshama comes from being Soveya. How does he grab your neshama away from you? How does he bring you mita? How does he bring you death? How does he bring you the tzad halotov to a person? Al yedei soveya, it brings to nitilat neshama. Therefore, midah keneged midah. When Mashiach comes, says Borei Olam, we're going to shecht him because he's guilty for being soveya and then bringing people to their nitilat neshama. This is unreal. This is unbelievable. And if this is the case, Rabotai, listen to this. Bayit Rishon. Yeah, on the outside, people were doing averot. But you knew exactly where they stood, and so did they. And they knew what their shortcomings were, but on the inside, they still held on to their bitachon. And they showed you the way it was. No trickery. No games. The Gamal, the Shafan. But Bayit Sheni, that was the Chazir. That was Edom. That was the Yetzirah's new tactic. That's so much more despicable, underhanding, and so crooked and sneaky. And for that he's going to get shechted. Because you're being sovei. On the outside you're showing you're one person, and on the inside, be'etzem, the guy's rotten. You think on the outside he's the most greatest tzaddik of all, and on the inside, mamish. And the guy is so delusioned that he believes his own lakshin, he believes his own garbage, and he believes that he's the mamish, the next gadol hador. And meanwhile, this guy is going to not good places. That was the tactic of the yetzer hara. That was the people of the Bayit Sheni, and that's the downfall of Sinat Chinam. It's in this respect, taka worse than all Gimel Averot Chamorot. Because over here, it's such a self-delusion. It's such a chazir. It's such a bait and switch in a certain way, where it's so underhanding. Our tikkun of this last dar, that we're still looking to fix the concept of this very point, to fix the concept of Sinat Chinam, to be able to finally bring a tikkun that we can be Toho Kibaro. What you see on the outside is the same guy on the inside. And he doesn't use the righteousness for evil. He's not this yetzer that brings people mitzvot in order to get him to do averot. And at the time they think they're the biggest and the most frumest person in the world. And meanwhile, mamash, this person is self-delusion. This is the tikkun of our generation. And that's why aseh l'charav. You need a Rebbe. Sometimes someone thinks that they're on their way to do the greatest things. The famous Maisa, Reb Chaim Volozhin. He came to his Rebbe, the Gaon. He wanted to open up the yeshiva of Volozhin, and his Rebbe told him no. No. Could you imagine a loftier and better cause than to open up a yeshiva that later on is going to be the grandfather of the entire yeshiva world for generations to come, and the Gedolim are going to come out? And he came and he asked his Rebbe, and he thought it was a shoo-in. It was a no-brainer. It was like nothing to talk about. Out of respect, he came and asked the Gaon. And the Gaon tells him no. Why not? It's the greatest thing in the world. And he came back, Nachamo, and he told him no. Nachamo, until finally, after a few times, the Gaon says, okay, now you can open. He says, the first time you came, I saw that it's too much hislaivus, too much zich, too much. I wanted you to do it for the right reasons. This without a Rebbe, how would you know? Without a Rebbe, how would you know what's right and what's wrong? It all looks like mitzvot. It all looks like Yireh Shamayim. It all looks kasher. It all looks gadlut. But you need a Rebbe to tell you, no, my friend, this is the chazir. It has to be done. It has to be done with Shem Shamayim. It has to be done right. It's an amazing concept, I'm telling you. I think that if you think back for a moment, when the Ribono Shel Olam created the world, Adam HaRishon, before the Chet, the yetzer hara was who? The Nachash. He was on the outside. You'd be able to run away from him. You'd be able to knock him out. You'd be able to, who knows? You'd be able to ditch him. But then when Adam ate from the forbidden, that evil that was on the outside, open and clear, now went on the inside. And now, although on the outside it looks like Mamish, the greatest creation of the Welt, this is the Maaseh Yadai Lehitpaer. He's the creation of the handiwork of Borei Olam. But on the inside, there was an evil that later on brings mitah to the world, brings galut to the world. Adayom, we're trying to be mitaken, the avon of Adam HaRishon. And this is the tikkun, that the tochok can be kebaro, because the evil came in, and we have to get it on the outside, not like the chazir. But we have to get it on the outside. Rabbi Frand was known to say, one of his most beautiful pieces, that on that night, on that fight between the archangel and Yaakov Avinu, at the end of the night, when Yaakov Avinu finally subdues him, and Yaakov Avinu says, I'm not letting you go, ki'im berachtani, until you give me a bracha. And then Yaakov Avinu, and he asks Yaakov, what's your name? And he gives him the name Yisrael. And then Yaakov Avinu turns around and he asks the Sarah of Esav, what's your name? And you know what he answers him? You know what the yetzer hara answers Yaakov Avinu when he asks him, what's your name? He says, Lama ze tish'al lishmi. Why are you asking me my name? What do you mean, why am I asking your name? You asked me my name. You asked me my name. I told you Yaakov. He says, no longer. Yaakov, Ki'im, Yisrael, Ki Sarita. So, if you ask me my name, can I ask you your name? He says, no. Lama ze tish'al lishmi. You know why? Because the Gemara says, Shemo kenhu. The name of somebody is his essence. Says the yetzer hara, my name changes from generation to generation. One generation I'm communism. One generation I have a name called socialism. One generation my name is called fascism. One generation my name is called social media. One generation my name is called Facebook, WhatsApp, and all the different things that are destroying the lives of so many good people. Lama zeh tish'al lishmi. Why are you asking me my name today? Tomorrow I'm going to come back with a different name. Tomorrow I'm going to come back with a different tactic. One generation, he tried to get them to sin on the outside. The other generation, he brought them mitzvot, trying to get them to sin on the inside. Ad hayom, we're still in the generation of sinat chinam, which means we're holding by the generation that on the outside we look so good. We're making siyum hashas with hundreds of thousands of people, and we're still sitting in galut for close to 2,000 years, because on the inside we're still lacking the kashrut. Unbelievable. Thank you for listening.